Hello everyone, my name is Jim Roach. I'm the president of the Business and Industry Association, and welcome to our inaugural edition of BIA Perspective. The Business and Industry Association is New Hampshire's statewide chamber of commerce. We have as members 400 leading employers across the state in virtually every economic sector. Virtually all size businesses are members of the BIA. Our mission is to promote a healthy climate for job creation and a strong New Hampshire economy, and the focus of our attention is the governor and his administration, the 424 members of the New Hampshire legislature, the 24 members of the Senate, and the 400 members of the House, and all the various state agencies with which businesses interact. The Department of Environmental Services, for example, the Department of Revenue Administration, the Public Utilities Commission. So we are advocates, we're nonpartisan, but we do see public policy issues through the lens of the business community. With me this evening are three team members at the BIA. Dave Juvet is Senior Vice President of Public Policy, and his issues portfolio includes taxes, labor issues, infrastructure issues, economic development. Next to Dave is Catherine Lehman. Her issue portfolio includes energy cost and infrastructure issues, reliability issues, as well as environmental compliance issues. And next to Kat is Kevin Flynn, Director of Communications and Public Policy. And Kevin focuses on technology, education, and healthcare issues. So we're going to start with Dave, and what we'd like to do is provide you with an overview of issues that the legislature will be focused on this session from a business perspective. So let me begin with Dave Juvet. Dave, maybe you can provide us with a quick overview.
Sure, thanks, Jim. So it's a budget year this year. The legislature is going to be working on a 2-year budget, so there's a lot going on. But before we talk about specifics, we should go back a little bit in time to November 2018, the 2018 elections, because the results of those elections had a profound impact on the State House. Pre-November 2018, the House and Senate were controlled by Republicans, and of course we had a Republican governor. Post-2018 elections, the House and Senate are now both controlled by Democrats, with Governor Sununu winning re-election. And that creates an interesting tension in the public policy process. And that's going to be reflected in a lot of different bills. Key agenda items for the Democratic House and Senate are a paid family leave insurance program. There's a House and a Senate bill, minor differences between the two. And another key agenda item relates to the Job Training Fund. This is a fund set up in the Department of Business and Economic Affairs that employers can access to help pay for some of the training costs associated with employees. We can go into a lot more detail with those, but those are high priority issues right now.
Dave, one other area that you cover are taxes. Can you bring us up to date on some of the tax proposals that are being advanced?
Absolutely, and this gets back to that tension between the legislature and the governor. Both the Senate and House have legislation calling for essentially a freeze in the business tax reductions to 2018 levels. They're scheduled to go down in 2019. They're scheduled to go down again in 2021. But if either of those House or Senate proposals pass, the reductions would essentially be frozen in place. The governor, on the other hand, in his budget address last week said that he supports continued reduction in business taxes. So remains to be seen how that will play out in the legislative process.
And just for our viewers, the business profits tax, the BPT, is the equivalent of our corporate income tax, and it started out before these reductions at 8.5%, which was one of the highest rates in the country. It's now, as of 2019, at 7.7%. It's scheduled to go down to 7.5%, but we'll see how that goes.
We'll see how it goes.
The BET, the business enterprise tax, the payroll tax that businesses pay, started out at 0.75% of payroll and is now at 0.675% of payroll this year, and is supposed to go down to 0.5% of payroll, correct?
That's correct. And the BET is a tax that most small businesses are probably more familiar with, and it's a business tax that is somewhat unique to New Hampshire. So there's a lot of focus on that at the State House.
And businesses pay that tax regardless of profitability.
That's correct.
Yeah. Catherine Lehman, who heads up environmental compliance issues for the BIA as well as energy issues, can you give us a quick overview of issues that the legislature is facing from a business perspective? Kat?
Sure, thanks Jim. So I'll go ahead and start with energy policy. So BIA has long been concerned with the both long-term and short-term energy costs that New Hampshire and the region faces. As you may know, New Hampshire faces electricity costs that are about 50 to 60% higher on average than the rest of the nation. In addition to higher costs, there's also several reliability issues within the region. A study that was released at the end of last year from ISO New England ran several different reliability scenarios, and in 19 out of 23 of those scenarios, they predicted that there was the possibility of rolling blackouts within the region by the winter of 2024 and 2025. So at the State House this year, you're going to see several different bills and pieces of legislation that seek to address this reliability concern, and one of those issues is net metering. So for those of you who may not be aware, net metering allows customer generators who produce some or all of their own electricity, and when they produce excess of that electricity, to sell it back to the grid and to receive a credit for that excess production. And so then the question becomes, how much of a credit should they receive? And the BIA has taken a position that that credit should not cause an increase in rates that would go above the avoided cost that's set by the Public Utilities Commission. When it goes above avoided costs, that's when you get into issues like cost shifting to residential ratepayers and businesses alike.
Great.
So moving to environmental policy, our number one concern at the BIA this session is with PFAS, PFAS, PFOA, which is PFOA, and related compounds that can be found in groundwater and in some cases drinking water within the state of New Hampshire. So DES is currently going through,
DES being?
the Department of Environmental
Thank
Services
you.
in New Hampshire is currently going through their rulemaking process, which requires them, as set by the legislature last year, to set maximum contaminant levels, known as MCLs, for these compounds here in New Hampshire. They have introduced preliminary MCLs that are currently going to be subject to the public hearing process, where individuals and businesses can come and testify to the merits of those MCLs. The BIA has taken the position that standards in New Hampshire should not be set above what federal regulations are in these environmental areas. And currently, the federal EPA has a health advisory for 70 parts per trillion for these compounds. So we think that anything that DES examines should be based on peer-reviewed science and studies that really seek to get at the issue of these compounds.
Thank you, Catherine. Just to elaborate on one of the points you made is that BIA has a long-standing policy where we don't like to see state regulations or rules that go beyond federal requirements. And the reason for that is that it puts businesses that are operating here at a competitive disadvantage relative to businesses in other states without more onerous regulations. So
Sure.
Thanks for sharing that. Kevin Flynn, again, Kevin handles education issues, healthcare issues, technology issues. Give us a sense of some of the top issues from a business perspective that the legislature is focused on.
Sure, Jim. I think perhaps we should just back up just a little bit to talk about why healthcare and education are business issues, because we see them. Healthcare is one of the biggest expenses for doing business anywhere. And so it's an expense that employers and employees both bear. And so issues that have to deal with things that drive up costs of healthcare are a big concern to businesses. And of course, the quality of healthcare is important too. We see a healthy workforce as a productive workforce. Same with education, that we're looking at things that improve the quality of education, because workforce development, as you know, is a really big issue we have in New Hampshire. We have, well, I don't know, Dave, you probably remember the number off the top of your head, how many different job openings we have in the state. I think it's in the tens of thousands. Mm-hmm. And employers are having a hard time finding qualified workers in many, many fields. And one of the things that we see, we think, is if we can better train not only the adult working population, but students coming out of high school and college for the skills that they're going to need for the 21st century. That's really important. So the question about some of the issues that we're looking at this year, very high level, there are efforts to look at reimbursement rates for Medicaid, which is a federal and state run program. Doing it a little rough justice here, but the state doesn't necessarily reimburse the Medicaid providers the same amount that a commercial insurer would.
Right.
So if there is a shortage or the reimbursement rate is not terribly high, well, that cost gets shifted to those of us who have commercial insurance. So there's
employers and employees alike.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's some efforts here to raise the percentage that Medicaid providers get reimbursed. There's also there's a bill that has to deal with the healthcare workforce, that particular sector of it. And there's also a lot of effort to look at how we can increase transparency in the world of pharmaceutical costs and how those costs get set by the time we go to the drugstore to pay for them. Over in education, there are also some issues about, or some legislation about increasing ways that students can get credit for extended learning opportunities. These would be things like doing internships or job shadows, or do dual enrollment where they're in high school but they're also taking some technical college classes. Want to make sure that all those credits are be able to apply towards high school graduation, and that our communities are really out there promoting this as a way of developing each of the students, and it just improves our workforce down the road.
Thank you, Kevin. On that note, if you were to ask me what the top concern of employers is all over the state, it would be access to a skilled workforce. And so one of the areas that we've been active on and will continue to be so is promoting and supporting the university systems and the community college systems funding requests before the legislature. Those two institutions are the largest supplier of raw talent to New Hampshire employers, and so it's important that the legislature and business leaders support the work that they do in filling the talent pipeline, especially when you consider the aging demographics that New Hampshire faces. A lot of us are within striking distance of retirement or have already retired. We have young people that flee the state. We're one of the worst states for hanging on to young people. So supporting the university system and the community college system as the fillers of the talent pipeline, so to speak, is really important to make education affordable so more kids stay here in New Hampshire. Dave, I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned a couple of issues that are worth getting into in just a little bit more detail. One is paid family leave. The governor has a plan that he is rolling out in conjunction with the governor of Vermont. It's an all-voluntary plan, and the House and the Senate have very similar bills, paid family leave. They're not voluntary, they're mandatory. Can you share a little bit more information about the two ideas going forward?
Yeah, so the issue behind paid family leave is if you have an employee that is taking time away from work, and this is generally a significant amount of time dealing with their own health or the health of a parent or the health of a child or spouse, that under the federal act that's established the parameters of this program, they don't get any pay for that, and so it creates a hardship for that employee. So the idea behind this is to come up with some type of state program where the employee, while they're away from work, will get some type of compensation to help get them through this time. The House and Senate bills are similar. They're not identical, but they both rely on the formation of a new insurance-like product that would be administered by the Department of Employment Security, and that's the same State Department that administers unemployment insurance benefits. The way it would work is every employee in the state would be a part of this program. The employer would be responsible for paying the premium cost associated with it, which is pegged at approximately 0.5% of the employee's salary. And then the employer has the option of deducting that cost from the employee's salary, paying for it themselves, or coming up with some type of 50-50 split.
But everybody pays except sole proprietors. Every employee.
Every employee has to be a part of the program.
Right.
Every employer has to participate except sole proprietors or those companies that have an equivalent benefit that is already a part of their benefit package.
Got it.
The governor's proposal is much different, and you're correct. You mentioned this is, the proposal at least, is in conjunction with the state of Vermont. The idea behind the governor's proposal is to take the New Hampshire employee base, state employees, and the Vermont state employee base and aggregate them as a group that is large enough, they estimate that's around 18,000 people, that they could then do an RFP, a request for proposal, for private sector insurance companies to write a paid family leave product. The parameters are a little bit different. The House and Senate are looking right now at 12 weeks of time off. The governor's proposal is less. He's looking at a 6-week proposal. But the major difference is there's no mandate on private sector businesses to participate. If the business chooses to participate and they meet certain requirements that are set up in the program, they can add their employees to the state program, the state employee program, to get those benefits. But there's no mandate that they do so.
Okay, thanks, Dave. That's helpful. The other issue that you mentioned is the job training fund. So right now there's an annual appropriation of $2 million to that fund, and it comes from the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which all employers pay into as part of their payroll taxes. But there's a new proposal. Maybe you can tell us more about that.
Right, and again, this is one of the highest priorities for Democrats in the Senate. They call it SB2, and the fact that it's 2 shows how high a priority it is for them. What they want to do is add more money to the job training fund, and this is money that is used by employers to generally a 50-50 match if they have employees that are lacking in skills or they need to be trained on new equipment. They can essentially get a grant from this program. The state picks up half the cost of the training, the employer picks up the other half. There's a separate component to this, which is called New Hampshire Work Ready, and that's through the community college system. And that program is designed to take people who are either underemployed or unemployed and need basic job skills in order to become more employable, give them the training they need through the community college program, and that makes it more likely for them to be able to get a job in the public or private sector.
Okay, and we have been supporting this expansion of the job training fund with some qualifications. Maybe
Right.
you can elaborate on that.
Well, the rub on it is, you mentioned it comes out of unemployment insurance taxes that almost every employer in the state pays. And the issue is if you take too much money from the trust fund, which is designed to pay unemployment insurance benefits, if there's a significant slowing of the economy or a recession, there won't be enough money in the trust fund to pay unemployment benefits. The other part of that is the balance in the trust fund is pegged at different thresholds for employers to get a tax discount on their unemployment insurance taxes. And again, if you take too much out of that trust fund to pay for these other programs, no matter how good the program is, you risk going under that threshold and you risk employers having to pay a higher tax.
So one final question. The BI's support of the expansion of the job training fund has several contingencies. Can you articulate those?
Yes, one of them was passed by the Senate in an amendment to the original bill. And our idea was that if there's money, if they increase this funding for these training programs, but at the end of the program year, there's money that hasn't been expended, rather than rolling it over into the next year, return that money back to the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund and then start from scratch again the next program year. The other two things we will be working on to try and get into the bill in the House, because the bill has already passed the Senate. And those are, if it appears that the balance in the trust fund is approaching what the threshold for the tax discount is, that the program revert back to the original $2 million funding. And in the third and final...
Because the idea is we don't want to jeopardize that discount.
That's right.
Discount.
In the third and final proposal that we've made to improve the bill, at least from BIA's perspective, is if we enter a period of recession or significant economic slowdown, and it's pretty apparent when you get to that point, and there's the drawdown on the trust fund is significant, our suggestion is the entire training program will be suspended, which we think is reasonable, because in the event of a recession or a severe economic slowdown, that's not when most employers are doing training programs.
There'll be a lot of people looking for work. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. I want to thank everybody for watching this inaugural edition of BIA Perspective, and we will do this on a regular basis, and we hope it provides some value to those of you that are already in the business community, wondering what some of the those of you that are watching the business community, wondering what some of the challenges and pressures businesses are facing. As I said, our mission is to promote a healthy climate for job creation and a strong New Hampshire economy. We're nonpartisan, but we do our work at the State House and with state regulators from a business perspective. We see issues through that lens. So again, I want to thank you for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you next time.